Hey guys, it's Alyssa, and today I'm going to walk you through step by step how to decorate this fall sugar cookie set using roll icing. I made 5 different designs and I'm going to show you all of my tips on how to use roll icing and how to just get a hang of it as a beginner cookier. So let's get started. One of my biggest tips is before you even get to the decorating, you want to plan out what color palette that you want to use. So for this, I went with 4 to 5 colors, and this is something that I usually recommend. In my experience, the less colors that you use, it actually looks a lot more cohesive, and that's because you have to use the colors on all the cookie designs instead of just 1 or 2. For each color that you choose, you're going to want to have 2 roll icing consistencies. The first one is an outline consistency, which is stiffer and it dries really quickly. And that's what I use to pipe on the rectangle and the squiggles. We use the outline consistency in order to create the sections that we're going to fill in and to keep that flood icing from spilling out everywhere. And then that brings me to the other consistency, and that's the flood type, and that's what I just use now to fill in the rectangle. Flood consistency is a lot thinner, so it's really easy to cover surfaces quickly, and because we use more of the icing, it creates this puffy look. When you start decorating your cookie, you really want to think about things in terms of layers. And this is just going to make the cookie look a little bit more 3D or realistic. And it's these types of steps that just add a nice touch to the final cookie. For some of you, it might be helpful to envision the actual item that you're trying to make the design for on the cookie. So if you think about a coffee cup, you can envision the white cup with the brown sleeve on top and then a lid on top. And when you think about it that way, then you kind of have a sense of what layer needs to be put down first. You guys saw me put down the white rectangles first, and then I just let that dry for about 1 to 2 minutes. I made a light brown color, and I'm going to be using this for both the coffee lid and for the sleeve. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm using the outline consistency, and I'm just going to gently put enough pressure so that I can pull the icing along to create that border. You don't want to pull it too quickly because sometimes the icing can break, and it's not something that's not fixable. You can go back and you can fill in that little break between the icing. I just think when it comes to decorating sugar cookies, you really need to have a level of patience because the slower you go, most of the time it turns out better. I'm going to use the flood icing for the same color, and I'm just going to put the tip of the piping bag up against that border that we created. So it doesn't have to be shoved in there where you're touching the bottom of the cookie, and then you're just going to fill in the whole space with that flood icing. And then to kind of just even it out and make it look a little bit nicer, I'm gonna go back in with my scribe tool. I love this scribe tool. It has a sharp pointed end, almost like a toothpick, but it's a little bit sharper, and it's great for popping air bubbles in your roll icing or for kind of dragging the icing into edges to make it look more square. And you can do the same thing with a toothpick if you're in a pinch and you don't have a scribe tool. When you start filling in a space with the flood icing, you want it to go up against that outline border first, and then you can fill in the inside. So from the outside to the inside. And the reason why we do this, or at least I do this, is because it gives you more control. And sometimes if you're a little too happy to fill in the flood icing, it can overflow the cookie and drip off the sides of the cookie. I'm using a wet on wet technique, which just lets you create some really cool designs, and it dries down into one smooth layer. To do this technique, you need to make sure that you're using another flood icing consistency, and you're going to pipe it onto that base layer before it's dried down. I wanted this to look like a pumpkin and not an orange blob, so I waited about 5 seconds before I piped on the last little oval shape. And you don't want to wait too long because the base layer can start to crust over. And then I'm going to go in and pipe on the stem. For the sake of this video, I cut up the footage so that you guys could see me decorate one design at a time. But what I'm doing is I'm actually decorating different cookies throughout the video. It's just because when you have flood icing, you want to let it dry for about 5 to 8 minutes before you add on your other details. If I had just tried to pipe on this border with the outline consistency icing without letting the flood dry a little, it would just sink right in like that wet on wet technique that I showed you guys. Yay, now we're moving on to our second design, which is a single pumpkin, and I promise as we move forward, the designs are going to be a little bit more simpler. I just wanted to get the latte cup out of the way so that you guys could see all of those techniques. To create some 3D pumpkin cookies, we really want to make sure that we're going to fill in the sections in the right order. When you look at a pumpkin in real life, you can see how the pumpkin has the seams or the sections and how they're rounded, and so in order to create this in a cookie, we want to make the sections very clear. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to just outline using my orange outline consistency icing, and then this is going to help us just to understand where we're gonna fill in our flood icing. You might be asking, what are the squiggles for? And that's a fair question, so let's talk about it. So I'm piping these squiggles using the outline consistency icing, and I'm just going back and forth. They don't have to be perfect, and the whole idea behind this is that when you fill in a section with your flood icing, the outside starts drying quicker than the inside. And because of that, what happens is after the whole cookie has dried, it will actually form craters on the surface. I believe that a lot of people don't notice this, however, unless you're a cookier and you do this all the time. You might be able to notice it on other people's cookies, but this is just a technique to use in order to help keep that puffiness of the royal icing. I'm filling in the first section of the pumpkin, and then I'm going to use my scribe tool just to make it look a little bit nicer and to get rid of a couple of the air bubbles that I saw. And then after that, I'm going to fill in the fourth section. If you have a pumpkin cookie cutter that only has an odd number of sections, that's no problem. You can go ahead and use that, and I'm going to show you how to fill in a 3-section pumpkin a little bit later in this video. Make sure you've given these 2 sections a little bit of time to dry in between, so that way the flood icing won't just all run together. I apologize for the next clips of the video because the color is just really off and bright, and that's because I was filming in natural light, and that rhymed, and because of that the sun just came out from behind the clouds. But I wanted to show you guys how I finished this design. I went in and I just used my brown outline icing for the stem, and then I added a little squiggle and then filled in the stem with the flood icing. You want to always use the squiggle method even for the tiniest of sections too, because they can also be susceptible to those craters. We are moving right along to our third design, and that is a leaf, and I'm just going to be using the dark brown icing for this whole design. If you look at this cookie, you can see that it has a lot of curves, and the scallop border makes it a little more challenging, but in order to break it up, what we're going to do is you want to push and pipe the icing out and then go around the curve of the cookie and then stop pushing the icing. So essentially, we're just breaking up the border instead of outlining the whole thing in one go, and this will create just a much better, sharper, and clearer border. I'm going to add in the squiggles here, and like I said before, they don't have to be perfect. You just want to make sure that you have enough squiggles to fill in the area. Now we're going to go in and fill the whole cookie with our dark brown flood icing. And you want to make sure that you're applying an even pressure by squeezing the piping bag so that the icing comes out in a nice smooth motion. You don't have to just squeeze it out so hard that you're going to create the flood icing to spill over onto your table. And if it happens, it's okay, but it's just a matter of having some control while you're piping. One thing I wanted to mention is that for the sake of this video, I'm not turning the cookie all around. I'm just keeping it in the same spot for you guys so that it's not too confusing. But when you're piping, you can turn the cookie any direction that you want. I let this cookie dry for about 5 to 8 minutes before I started adding the details, otherwise it would just sink right into that flood icing. So here's one of my most efficient tips. Let's say you guys are decorating 12 leaves or just 12 fall cookies, whatever it is. You want to start with the first cookie and pipe on the base layer. Then you want to move on to the second cookie, pipe on the base layer, and so forth. So by the time you're done piping the base layer onto every cookie, you can go back and start with cookie number 1, and that layer will be dry enough to start adding your second layer or your details. Sometimes when it comes to cookie decorating, I really like things to look really nice and cohesive, and so personally I like the look of using the same dark brown color in order to create these fall leaves. But some other ideas that you can do is, instead of creating the veins with the same color, you could go ahead and use a different color. You could use the orange or the white, or before the base flood icing has dried, you could do the wet on wet technique for the veins. And there's so many different ways that you can decorate your cookies. Design number 4 is our double pumpkin, and I'm going to show you guys how to fill in a 3-section pumpkin. I decided to switch up the colors a bit, and I'm going to make a white pumpkin and a pink pumpkin. I just like to bring in a brighter color into the fall sugar cookie set, and for me that color is pink because I really like the color pink. I think that it goes well with browns and oranges. And so to start, we need to create those little tiny little pumpkin sections. So I went ahead and I outlined it with my white outline consistency icing, and then I'm going to add in the squiggles. For these kinds of shapes, you sort of have to think a little bit ahead about what the final design is going to look like, because we have to draw out our outlines onto the cookie surface versus just outlining the whole cookie as one. So I would go ahead and look up inspiration pictures, or of course you can follow my video, and you just want to create these sort of oval shapes. I did leave that little tiny cookie space open at the top of the white pumpkin because we need a place to put our dark brown stem. I do apologize for the sunlight again. It started going behind the clouds and then it would come out, and I prefer to film in natural lighting, but I'm definitely gonna have to switch up the setup for next time because this is just too much sun. I added the squiggles to all my pumpkins, and now I'm gonna go ahead and fill them in with the flood icing. I'm gonna start to fill in that middle section for both the white and the pink pumpkins. You want to give it about 30 seconds to a minute of drying time before you go back in and you fill in the rest of the sections with the flood icing. I I did wind up having to turn this cookie upside down because I was having trouble getting into the stem area. So this is what I mean by turning the cookie so that it works for you. For me, I'm just able to see better when I have it facing this direction. If you do turn the cookie in the section that works for you, it will also come out looking better too, because you just have more control when the cookie is facing you. For the last design, I'm doing an apple cider donut, and I did not cut out the centers only because this was kind of an afterthought design. So if you do bake up the cookies and you want to make donuts, you can go ahead and use a little mini circle cutter to cut out those centers, but we can use our royal icing to kind of manipulate it a bit to get that donut shape. Now, one thing that you see me doing is I'm not using an outline icing consistency. I'm not really following any of the rules that I told you guys, and that's because we are going to be dipping this in sanding sugar, so it doesn't have to be perfect at all, and sometimes there's a relief in not having to make it perfect. Now, when there are really big sections, sometimes for my brain, it just seems very overwhelming. So I like to kind of create sections myself, and it's just a lot more manageable in my opinion. And that's what you see me doing here. So if you're confused, that's just something that I personally like to do. I love using sanding sugar when it comes to royal icing because you can use it in so many different ways. Like if you think about it, you can use it for snowflakes, for snowmen, and there's just so many different ways to use it. And so I'm just going to pour it directly into a bowl, and then I'm going to dip the cookie right into it, making sure that I get all of those edges nice and dipped into the sugar. And then there you go, you have an apple cider donut. So here are just some of the final pictures and video that I have of these cookies, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and that it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.